Welcome back to another episode of Watching the Meta, the weekly series where we take a look at the standard, pioneer, and modern metagames, see what everybody is playing in the MTGO, and sometimes paper tournaments if those are available to us. We take a look and see what the metagame breakdown looks like, and at the very end of each segment, we try to see if we can find some spice along the challenges and paper events over the weekend. Speaking of spicy deck lists, if you want to purchase some spicy cards, be sure to head over to today's sponsor, CoolStuffInc.com. Be sure to use promo code Doom at checkout to get yourself 5% off your next order and this exclusive Rhino token while supplies last. Cool Stuff Inc., they got cool stuff, and they got it in stock. And with that out of the way, let us begin, as we always do, with Modern. And Modern, as I've been saying, it feels like I'm beating a drum over the past couple of weeks. Modern is, I think, the most diverse and what seems to be relatively exciting format. Boros Energy was 12.9 last week, very slight increase to 13.3. It is still the best deck in the format, and you do need to be prepared for it if you are going to a local RCQ. But it is very beatable. There's plenty of good sideboard cards against it. There's decks that have natural favorable matchups against it, like just combo in general, Brood-Scale, Amulet, Belcher, Rupee Storm. And it is certainly, in terms of tier 1 or best decks in the format, it is, I would say, a pretty healthy one to have a mid-range deck like this be one of the best decks. And I know it can have aggressive draws, but in any case, very happy with that. Second place here, very interesting to see Esper Blink, which if we look at last week's graph, I don't even see it listed here because it was probably caught somewhere in the 1.8 to 1.3% range, but clocking in at 7.8% of the metagame, Esper Blink. Now, if you haven't seen Esper Blink, it's very similar to the Orzhov Blink decks that utilize stuff like Flicker Wisp, Overlord of the Baelmerk, Felia, that kind of core engine, and it really is just splashing for Psychic Frog and then Consigned to Memory on the sideboard. There's really not a lot of other blue cards in the deck list. So that's second place. And then everything else, like we have a whole bunch of in the 5 to 6 range, like Brood-Scale 5.5, Affinity 5.9. Those are, Brood-Scale took a little bit of a dip from last week. Affinity is about the same. Amulet about the same. Somebody did point out in the comment section that if you want to include Mardu Energy with Boros, that gets us to about 17% of the metagame. But, Mardu is not noticeably different. It's really just splashing black for Sephiroth and sometimes Bowmasters. Belcher, Prowess, you see right there. Domain Zoo, 4.7. Really, other than that, there's not a ton of other huge shifts outside of the Esper Blink, really going from non-existent to 7.8. And then Orzhov Blink alongside it, 2.7, down from 4.9 last week. So some people who were playing Orzhov likely switched to Esper. So that's what the metagame looks like. You see the challenge winners. One of those was a showcase. The showcase was actually, believe it or not, won by Demir Oculus. And then the rest of the challenges, 2 Boros, 2 Orzhov, an Amulet, a Brood-Scale, and a Temur Eldrazi. So with all of that said, let's take a look and see if we can find some spicy deck lists in these top 32s. And we are going to begin today with Affinity, but maybe not the Affinity deck that you would expect to see. And let me know in the comments section. I'm very curious to see, would you actually consider this to be an Affinity deck? I mean, it has Urza Saga and it has Mox Opal, so therefore it's Affinity adjacent, but it really is sort of this hybrid between Affinity and Prowess. Now, over the past couple of weeks, we've seen Affinity adopt Cori-steel Cutter as a powerful engine tool. These decks, again, they're starting to get away from Affinity. They're playing VVs and Emrys and Tamios, a bunch of interaction, and then utilizing the Affinity part of the deck as just mana generation with Mox Opal and Mox Amber. But this deck is taking it one step further and even playing more non-Affinity threats such as Dragon's Rage Channeler. Now, Channeler seems a bit weird in this deck, but it is very powerful when you're deciding to play Bauble, Amber, and Opal, which you want to do anyways because you are Cori-steel Cutter deck. Once you've decided that you want to play Dragon's Rage Channeler because of your zeros, you then are maybe more interested in a card like Matoya, which is a 1/4 for 3 mana that says whenever you scry or surveil, draw a card. This is not once per turn. Keep that in mind. So every time you cast a 0 mana card with a Dragon's Rage Channeler in play, you get to trigger Matoya and draw a card. When you cast Preordain, you're scrying 2 as part of the resolution of the spell, you then draw a card. When you fetch for a Thundering Falls, you scry, or surveil rather, and you draw a card. So there's a lot of like incidental ways to draw extra cards with Matoya, and at the end of the day, it is still a legendary creature for Mox Amber. Now, I don't necessarily know if this is better than playing a Vivi, because that is what you're essentially cutting for it. You don't really have room to play that many 3-drops in this deck, but it's certainly an interesting take and something that I would be at least willing to give it a shot before I immediately dismissed it. Next up, from user Articuno Zard, excellent username. I feel like we've covered their lists before because I do kind of remember that name. In 4th place here, so a nice little top 8. This is Golgari Sacrifice, Golgari Nightmare. This is an interesting deck list that utilizes a lot of self-mill. So you have Stitcher's Supplier, and you have Malevolent Rumble to help set you up and fill your graveyard with a bunch of extra cards. Utilizing the self-mill, and Bailmerk as well, to help self-mill. You're utilizing that to set up powerful plays such as Emperor of Bones, which if you mill over a large creature, such as Yigra, Eater of All, you can then put that into play for 2 mana. You also can just mill over copies of Cauldron Familiar, and then eventually get those back with said Yigra. But then you're also enabling stuff like Chthonian Nightmare, where you self-mill a bunch with Bailmerk and Supplier. You can then start sacrificing those to rebuy pieces, build up some energy, get the 5, get back Yigra. And that really is what it is. That really is the end plan and the end goal for this deck. Get Yigra into play and have 2 familiars somewhere in some zones, whether it's the graveyard or the battlefield, and then just kill your opponent. The nice thing about that is once you have the Yigra in play, every single time a creature dies, because it turns all creatures into food, and then it says whenever a food is put into your graveyard, you put 2 counters on Yigra. There's actually some loops, even if you don't have double familiar, if you just have some stuff in a nightmare, you can set up a one-shot kill where you just, loop a nightmare a couple of times, make a big Yigra, and then just eventually attack them. Some good interaction like Thoughtseize Fatal Push, and then some other ways to grease the wheels, and just good cards like Orcish Bowmasters, Graveyard Trespasser, Bogart Trawler, fantastic one to get back with Bailmerk. And yeah, interesting little take on sort of the Golgari graveyard deck. And I sort of like this approach. Just, you have a ton of different ways to accrue value, but you also have an endpoint to make sure you have a way to race the combo decks. We have a little bit of a throwback with this one from Esper WTB in 30th place. Grixis Shadow? Anyone? So the concept here is Cecil Dark Knight, a new card from Final Fantasy. Excellent 1-drop that happens to pay life. Every time you deal damage with Cecil, you lose that much life, and then if you have 10 or less, well, technically if your life total is less than or equal to your starting life total, but we're not playing Commander, you get to transform Cecil and it flips into a 4/4 lifelink. So with something like Death Shadow, you have incentives to pay a bunch of life anyways, right? With stuff like Fetch Lands, Shock Lands, and Thoughtseizes, right? Well, this would be like the Walmart Death Shadow, where once you pay a bunch of life, you can put a Cecil into play, attack with it, flip it, and then kind of go from there. Notably, the flip side of Cecil being a 4/4 lifelink doesn't interact the best with Death Shadow, but, if you have both of them, just don't attack with the Cecil. You don't want that to happen. But what I like about this deck is the inclusion of Cori-steel Cutter, and this is for a couple of reasons. So the Death Shadow deck is very low to the ground, a very low curve, plays a ton of 1-mana cards, and even has stuff like Mishra's Bauble. And what's great about Cutter is, it's good with a bunch of cheap cards, but more importantly, it is a way to give Death Shadow trample. And in combination with Violent Urge, you can sort of build your own TBR without having to actually put TBR in your deck, because Violent Urge, in most circumstances, is a better card than TBR because, one is less than 2. And it also incentivizes you to put good cards in your deck like Cori-steel Cutter. So I kind of like that approach. And just some other good threats here like Dragon's Rage Channeler, Nether Goyf. You're filling up the graveyard with Bauble, so it kind of makes sense to play Goyf. And then Psychic Frog, no-brainer here. Some cantrips, Expressive, Thoughtseize, Lightning Bolt. A lot of stuff you would expect to see in a Shadow deck, but very interesting and new take with this sort of like Cecil, Cori-steel Cutter, Violent Urge plan. And for you Shadow lovers out there, maybe something to give a shot. And last but not least, we have Perky T in 23rd place. This is... I don't know what to call this. Do we call this Mardu Scam? I think Mardu Scam is probably the more appropriate name. So essentially the idea here is you have 4 copies of Torpor Orb and 4 copies of Doorkeeper Thrall. Both of these cards say, creatures entering the battlefield do not cause abilities to trigger. Technically this one says artifacts too, but the important part there, you have 2 Hushbringer as well. This one also accomplishes the same thing. Creatures entering the battlefield don't cause abilities to trigger. So you have 10 ways to shut off ETBs. The powerful play is to, if you have one of those 3 cards in play and you play either a Kroxa or a Flage, the Titans have the abilities when they enter the battlefield. If they weren't escaped, you sacrifice them. Well, if they don't have abilities when you put them into play, when you just cast them from your hand for 2 or 3 mana respectively, they just stay in play. So it's sort of like a, I guess you could call it a Splitter Twin deck, although people hate when I use that term. So A plus B, find 2 mana piece that shuts off ETBs, play Big Titans, keep it in play. And then the rest of the deck is 4 Ragavan, 4 Bitter Reunion, 4, so you have Bitter Reunion and Faithless Looting. The discards not only help you flash back or escape your Titans if you don't have a way to stop the ETBs, but they also, in the specific case of Bitter Reunion, let you have haste. So Reunion can give your Titans haste if you don't have an arena, and then the discard also sets you up for Unearth. So if you have a Torpor Orb, you go looting, discard Flage, unearth the Flage, get it back, you don't have the ETB, so on and so forth. So a lot of cool ways that you can kind of mix and match both of those plans. And yeah, very interesting take on this sort of scam style deck list with all the Titans. So good take, Perky T. So that's going to do it for Modern. Let us go and switch over to Pioneer. And here we have the Pioneer metagame. Nothing too different from last week. They are who we thought they were. Mono Red Mice, a little bit down from last week from 27 to 24.4. Phoenix, roughly about the same. Mono Black Midrange, down a little bit. Orzhov Monument, that's the Greasefang deck list, down a little bit. And Boggles is up slightly from 5.6 to 6.3. This makes sense, right? You would assume that the Boggles deck has to have a reasonable matchup against Mono Red. 2 things that I want to point out here that are very, very big standouts compared to, I guess, sort of 3. Rakdos Demons from 4.4 to 6.3. It's a reasonable increase. Golgari Sacrifice, last week 1.9, this week 5.6. And then Celestia Angels, which is this slice right here, it's the same as Golgari Sacrifice, 1.9 last week, 6.9, nice, this week. So that is, and I would assume that, again, if you look at decks like Celestia Angels and Golgari Sacrifice, you would guess they might have a good matchup into Mono Red. Although Mono Red is playing 4 copies of, most of them are playing Sunspine Links in the main deck. And if you don't have a way to remove that card, not being able to gain life, well, you understand how that's good against Angels. And also, for the same reason, good against Golgari Sacrifice. Other than that, nothing too crazy. Is it prowess? Basically nobody played it last week. It's at 2.5 this week. That's somewhat notable. But yeah, everything else pretty much the same. Lotus Field was down big, 5.6 to 1.9. I guess that makes sense because it's traditionally had a bad Mono Red matchup. So that's pretty much it for the metagame. 2 Phoenix, 1 Azorius, 1 Lotus, 1 Mono Red. Let's go ahead and see if we can find some spicy deck lists. So this isn't really that spicy, but I did want to show you what the Is It Prowess deck is looking like. And really the reason I wanted to show you this is 90% of this, well, I should say not going to say is legal in Standard. 90% of this was legal in Standard. It's crazy to me how similar these decks look between Standard and Pioneer, obviously pre-ban list. And there's some cards we don't have in Standard, right? Like Consider over Sleight of Hand, that's a big upgrade. Fiery Impulse over Torch the Tower, huge upgrade. And more specifically, this card, which, may or may not It's possible this card should not be legal in Pioneer. Who knows? But yeah, this card, obviously very powerful. But yeah, this is what the prowess decks have been looking like in Pioneer recently. Not surprising, VV is an extremely powerful card. I do like that they have both Planisphere and Cori-steel Cutter to give you a little bit of redundancy. Planisphere is also kind of cracked with VV. If you put the Planisphere on the VV, every time you play a 1-mana spell, you are plus mana, because the Planisphere puts a counter on it and the VV has a counter from its own ability. So you play a 1-mana spell and you get 2 counters on VV, that's plus 1 mana. So it really just lets you storm off in one big turn, so I like that. And maybe something to think about for Standard. Post-ban list, VV and Planisphere? Maybe is it still a deck? Who knows? But yeah, this is what prowess looks like in Pioneer. Let's move on. So I want to preface this by saying I still don't entirely know how this deck works, but I'm going to try to do my best. So this is B Madman, who, correct me if I'm wrong, if you know this for a fact, I'm pretty sure this is Benton Batson, who made the finals of the Pioneer Pro Tour that Reed won. Benton was playing Boggles, Reed was playing Creativity. I think it was at Chicago? No, Chicago was Vampires. Let me know in the comments. But in any case, this is a Scapeshift deck where we're playing 4 copies of Scapeshift. And I believe the combo is you have Port of Carfell. So Port of Carfell says 6 mana, tap sack, mill 4 cards, then return a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. Port of Carfell can loop Aftermath Analyst once you have enough Lotus Fields in circulation. So basically, in a way to untap your lands, which we now have additional copies of in the form of the Wandering Minstrel. So you have that plus Spelunking now, which is kind of cool. But I'm pretty sure the combo is Scapeshift, get like, I think is it 2 Lotus Fields? It might be 3. But what you can do is you can stack the triggers such that, or I guess there's no triggers here because there's no amulets, they just come into play untapped. You float a bunch of mana before you have to sacrifice your lands, then you still activate the Port of Carfell, sacrifice, get the Aftermath Analyst, and that's like an infinite mana loop, and then you can eventually loop, I think there's a Damage Desert, Maestro's Theater. Usually they play a desert that deals damage, so I don't actually know what the kill condition would be. Looking. I should have thought of this before. Oh, right, you can just Port of Carfell to get back Thassa's Oracles, because in sort of when doing the combo, you mill your entire library. So basically, mill yourself out, eventually get back Oracle. Which is funny, because it seems a little bit tougher to mill yourself out when you're playing Yorion at 80 cards, but, you know, you get more room to put more stuff in this deck. So yeah, interesting that now this is maybe possible because of Minstrel, so something to think about. And the last one I have for you here from Usunk in 16th place. This is a pretty classic looking humans deck list for Pioneer. The one thing I will mention, no copies of Collected Company, which usually when you see like a 4 or 5 color humans deck in Pioneer, you start with 4 copies of that. So a little surprised to not see that, but instead we're just playing all of the good humans. Cecil, new card from Final Fantasy. As we talked about earlier, phenomenal 1-drop. Even just when you're, no matter what deck you're playing, if you have black mana, this is always a consideration. It's an extremely powerful card. You have Lords in the form of Coppercoat Vanguard and Thalia's Lieutenant. You have very good disruptive 2-drops in the form of Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, Kitesail Freebooter. You have Specialist to grind, Thraben Inspector for a little bit of value, Reflector Mage for removal, Inti for grinding, and Experiment 1, more aggressive 1-drops, and then 2 copies of Sheltered. But another important thing is I think this is really only possible due to the inclusion of, well, I guess they only have 2 mana Confluence, but Starting Town is a huge, a big deal for decks like this. Just more 5-color lands that allow you to play a black 1-drop, a green 1-drop, a blue-white 3-drop, and a red 2-drop. You can't do that with this many 5-color lands. So, cool looking deck list. Humans, I tried a little bit of something similar in Standard because we have Vanguard, but didn't quite work out that well. Speaking of Standard, let's go ahead and give a little send-off to possibly one of the worst Standard formats of all time. Let's take a look at the graph. Well, at least we're not going to have as much red on the graph next week. I wasn't even going to do a Standard segment, but I had to show you this graph. 47.5%. There was multiple, so there were 5 challenges There was a showcase challenge that I forgot to include. It was won by Prowess, and I think there was like 10 mono red decks in the top 32, so it wouldn't have changed that much. One of the challenges had 18 mono red decks in the top 32. Yeah, really nothing to talk about. This, thank God, we're saved. If you guys didn't hear, there was a ban announcement. I'm recording this on Tuesday. It's going to go out on Wednesday. The ban announcement was on Monday. Go check out my reaction to the ban announcement. You can get my thoughts, and I'm sure we're going to have plenty of post-ban content to sink your teeth into over the next couple of weeks. I did, however, have one deck list that I wanted to showcase to you, and I think this is the perfect way to sort of encapsulate the entirety of this standard format ever since Cori-steel cutter got printed. And here you go. Nathan of the Gilt Leaf, 29th place, the best standard deck you've ever seen. Go buy your islands right now. I don't know what else to tell you. Anyways, folks, that's going to do it for today's video. If you enjoyed, please consider subscribing to the channel, like the video, drop a comment in the comment section down below what you thought of the video, and we're going to get some new standard next week. I'll see you then. Adios.